Penguin Random House Audio presents Ted Bell's Monarch by Ryan Steck. Read for you by John Shea. For Theodore Augustus Bell III. The monarchy is so extraordinarily useful. When Britain wins a battle, she shouts, "God save the Queen." When she loses, she votes down the Prime Minister. Winston Churchill. Prologue. Unfinished Business. Lord Alexander Hawke stood proud on the bridge of his magnificent flagship Seahawk as it sailed straight into hell. It was time to finish what he had started. Poised atop the crest of a 60-foot wave, it had climbed only moments before. The 200-foot sailing yacht seemed to hover at the edge of an abyss. The howl and shriek of the wind tearing at the sails was barely audible over the sustained thunder of the Phalanx missile defense system, its Vulcan minigun hurling thousands of rounds into the sky, targeting a spread of incoming anti-ship missiles. Hawke had added the Phalanx system to augment Seahawk's primary weapon during the last refit before leaving on the Antarctic expedition, a decision that now seemed nothing short of prescient. The missiles, Soviet-era P-15 Termit and the Chinese knockoff SY-1 Shangyu, left bright ribbon trails across the night sky as they homed in on the Seahawk at supersonic speeds, only to erupt in fiery detonations as 20-millimeter shells from the Vulcan sought them out and one by one tore them apart. Farther out, across the undulating ocean surface, bright flashes not only marked the location of the source of those missiles, 4 destroyer-type naval vessels, but also signaled the launch of a second wave. "Steady on," cried Hawke. "We've almost got them right where we want them." "Yeah, where exactly is that, boss?" asked Hawke's friend Stokely Jones, Jr. "'Cause where I want them is about 3,000 miles away, approximately." Stoke, as he was known to his friends, was a former U.S. Navy SEAL who had spent more than his fair share of time getting pounded by high seas and weather aboard vessels far less robust than Seahawk, but he was nevertheless looking a little green about the gills. "Where I want them," countered Hawke, "is at the bottom of the bloody Southern Ocean." "Ah," was Stoke's thoughtful reply. "Well, looks like the feeling may be mutual. And in case you hadn't noticed, there's a lot more of them than there are of us." Hawke just laughed. "Never fear, Stoke. As Lord Nelson said, when the enemy is committed to a mistake, we must not interrupt him too soon." Stoke wasn't exactly sure what mistake their enemy had committed to, but decided now might not be the moment to explore the topic. As a Navy man, albeit one who had never commanded one of His Majesty's warships, Hawke had long admired— no, admired was too plain a word— he idolized Britain's greatest naval hero, Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson, who, despite being badly outnumbered, had led his small naval expeditionary force into battle and crushed Napoleon's navy at Trafalgar without the loss of a single ship. Nelson, who famously said, "A glorious death is to be envied," was the very embodiment of the heroic ideal that a young Alex Hawke had aspired to, and that he now, as a grown man of 38 years, did his utmost to live by. It was Nelson he strove to emulate as he drove Seahawk before the wind, headlong into the towering seas and straight down the throats of the enemy vessels who mistakenly believed that they were the hunters and not the hunted. Nelson, whose valor and spirit of sacrifice inspired him to go boldly on the offensive, even in the face of seemingly overwhelming odds. And if, like Nelson, he did not live to see the ultimate victory, he would at least have the satisfaction of a glorious death. To the extent that he had already accomplished his primary objective, the complete destruction of the ultra-secret Antarctic Dragon Base, that victory was already in hand. The only remaining question was whether he would live to celebrate it, or if, like Nelson, he would receive his greatest honors posthumously. The destruction of the Dragon Base, like the facility itself, had been a clandestine affair. International treaty forbade any sort of military activity on the continent, which meant that, despite the fact that the very existence of the base was a violation of international law, the aggrieved nations of the West could not take direct action against it. It had fallen to Hawke and his crew of modern privateers to rectify the situation, which they had done in spectacular fashion. Hawke and Stoke, leading a crack team of commandos, the legendary outfit known as Thunder and Lightning, so named for the call signs the two founders had used during their time serving as Navy SEALs, had gone ashore and traveled cross-country through the harsh polar environment in order to infiltrate the facility. Once there, they had planted enough explosives to destroy a small city, and, once clear, had detonated the lot, collapsing the underground tunnels and chambers where the rogue nations of the Red Star Alliance had established a secret forward operating base from which to launch their bid to control the Southern Ocean in its entirety. The mission had gone spectacularly. The Dragon base had been completely destroyed without the loss of a single man from Hawke's team. All that had remained was to reunite with Seahawk for the long voyage home, a voyage that would take them once more into the most dangerous seas on the planet. A belt of frigid water spanning more than 20 degrees of latitude, upward of 1,500 miles in places, and constantly circulating, unimpeded by continental landmasses, the Southern Ocean generated fierce winds and monstrous waves. Mariners called the region south of 40 degrees latitude the Roaring Forties. Below that was the Furious 50s, followed by the Screaming 60s. To reach Antarctica, Seahawk had already braved the southern seas once. Getting home would require a second crossing, but this time wind and waves were not the most immediate threat. The destruction of the Dragon base had not gone unnoticed. Even before the Zodiac rigid-hull inflatable boats carrying the triumphant commandos reached the yacht, Seahawk's radar had identified two naval vessels, the Quanzhou, a Chinese-type O-52B destroyer, and the Mariscal Sucre, an Italian-made Lupo-class light frigate in service to the Bolivarian Navy of Venezuela on an intercept course. Not long thereafter, two more military signatures were identified. The Rio Los Palacios, a Cuban Revolutionary Navy Rio da Muji-class frigate, and the Admiral Vinogradov, an Udaloy-class frigate in the Pacific Fleet of the Russian Navy. Having failed to defend their Antarctic base, the Red Star Alliance forces now had a new objective: revenge. Seahawk was a triple-masted sailing yacht, capable of speeds in excess of 30 knots depending on wind conditions, and there was no shortage of wind in the Screaming 60s, which meant that it could easily outrun the military vessels now pursuing it. The supersonic anti-ship missiles those vessels were carrying were another matter, but this was of little concern to Hawke, who had no intention of running from this final battle. Retreating, to turn tail and run scared, was simply not in his blood. What was in his blood, though, stretched back centuries, and now, as it came alive more than ever, Lord Alexander Hawke smiled. Hawke, a direct descendant of the legendary English privateer Black Hawk, had always known that the blood of pirates flowed through him, but never had he felt so in touch with his ancestral calling as he did at this very moment. When the hostile ships had begun appearing on the screen of the fire control radar system, Hawke ordered the yacht to come about and set a course straight for the enemy. Seahawk was going on the attack. "Incoming!" Stoke shouted, pointing at the flare of a missile's rocket motor burning through the sky toward them. The phalanx system had taken out most of the first wave, but most was not all of them. One missile had slipped through, and one missile was enough to break Seahawk's back. "I see it," replied Hawke calmly. A former naval aviator, he'd been on the wrong end of an enemy missile before, and knew that at a certain point it all came down to luck. And if this was to be the end, he would meet it in true British fashion, With the most casual indifference, he stabbed the shipwide public address and said, "All
Sample complete. Ready to continue?"